Let me ask you something. When your child sits at the table to do their homework or their schoolwork and they're just staring at the page, they're not writing anything, what's your gut reaction? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you saying? What are you doing? If the word that comes to mind is lazy, I want you to stay with me because I think we need to talk about that word. And if you're feeling guilty because that's the first thing you think of, my child must be lazy, I also want you to push that aside and not worry about that, because any parent who has been in that situation, including myself, has thought that same thing. My name is Krista, and I've spent over 10 years in the classroom. I've also tutored for 3 years, and I have 2 kids of my own that I now homeschool. And every child that I've taught, my own included, all learn very differently. And in all of my time teaching in the classroom, at home, and tutoring, I can count on one hand the number of kids that I actually believed were lazy. What I've seen instead over and over again throughout the years, and mine included, were kids who had just stopped trying. And that's not the same thing, trying and being lazy. And today we're going to talk about what is actually happening when a child looks like they've given up, how to tell the difference between those who won't and those who can't. And then 3 things that you can do at home this week to get a clearer picture of what your own child actually needs. Listen, I get it. One of the most painful questions that a parent can ask themselves is my child being lazy, or are they actually struggling? Maybe your child is avoiding homework. Maybe they're rushing through assignments. Maybe they're saying things like, I don't care. School's dumb. I'm just bad at this. And all the while you're wondering to yourself, how did we get to this point? And is there anything I can do to help? But there's one thing that I want you to hear right away, and it's this. Most kids who appear lazy are actually overwhelmed. They're discouraged, or they're just missing some key skills. And so today we're going to talk about how to tell the difference between that lack of effort, some of the executive functioning challenges that middle schoolers face, and where there might be some real learning gaps. And we're doing all of this so that you as the parent can respond with more support for your child instead of the constant frustration. So let's start by redefining something. True laziness, meaning a child who is fully capable, understands the work, has the skills required, and just simply refuses out of pure disinterest, that child is actually much less common than people think. Lazy is a character judgment. It's saying something about who your child is. And when we attach character judgments to behaviors, we as parents stop looking for the actual cause. We're just making assumptions based on what they're doing. And so today we want to look at the actual cause behind what we think is laziness. And what we often label as laziness is actually something called learned helplessness. And this is a concept in psychology that was first described by a researcher named Martin Seligman. And here's what it means in very plain terms. Learned helplessness is when a person has experienced repeated failure or lack of control. They just stop trying. Not because they're lazy, but because their nervous system has learned that effort does not lead to success. They're not necessarily giving up. They've already given up because they were taught by experience that there's no point. And so in other words, learned helplessness happens when a child has experienced enough difficulty or failure that they begin to believe it doesn't matter what I do, it won't work. And so instead of continuing to try and put in that effort, their brain protects them by saying, why bother? And this can show up in a number of ways. Perhaps they refuse to work. You ask them to sit down and they just storm away. Maybe they rush really quickly through their assignments, something that should take 15, 20, 30 minutes, they're getting done in 5. Maybe what they're saying is really giving you some indication. They're saying they just don't care. They don't care about the grades. They don't care about the assignment. Or they're getting started and they're just giving up too quickly. Underneath all of this behavior, it's so important that we understand This child is probably feeling discouragement and embarrassment. And what they're doing is they're protecting themselves from feeling like they're failing again. A child who can't decode a word in grade 2 got labeled as slow or behind. A child who can't hold a pencil properly was just told to try harder. A child who asked for help too many times learned that asking is just embarrassing. And so that by the time they're 12 or 13 and they're sitting at their desk or they're sitting at the homework table and they're staring at the page, they have years of evidence built up that effort is pointless. This is not laziness. This is actually a very logical response to a painful experience, a buildup of painful experiences over the years. But here's what I want you to hold on to. As a parent, as someone who loves and cares for your child, a child who is shut down out of learned helplessness absolutely can come back from that. But the thing we need to realize is that it's not going to come with more pressure or more lecturing. It's going to look a lot different, and we'll get there. But first, it's really important that we talk about what to actually look for. I want to give you 3 warning signs that you can consider as you're looking at whether or not your child is struggling with their learning. And the first one is taking a look at the foundational learning gaps. And that is really exactly how it sounds. It means that there's building blocks that are missing somewhere earlier in your child's learning, and everything else that's built on top of that has become shaky as a result. But here's the tricky thing about foundational learning gaps is that they don't often show up immediately. A child can keep up for years using workarounds, memorizing patterns, relying on context clues, and just general less expectations when they're younger. But when the material starts getting more complex, they are entering into middle school where they need to do things more independently, that gap, it becomes impossible to hide. And like I said, that's what happens in middle school. Because in middle school, there's an assumption made that students already have strong abilities in things like reading comprehension, writing organization, vocabulary, note-taking, summarizing information. And right or wrong, that's just what the standards are. That's what the expectations are. But if those skills were never fully developed in the earlier years, schoolwork can feel very overwhelming. For example, here's some signs. Maybe your child can answer questions in conversations, but they just cannot write those same answers down. That shows that there's a gap in written expression, not in their ability to understand the material. Maybe they read words accurately, but they can't tell you what they just read. So that means their decoding, their ability to actually sound out words is good. That's intact, but they're struggling with their comprehension. Or maybe they understand a concept when you explain it to them one-on-one, but when they go to write a test, it falls apart. It's like they don't know anything at all. And that could be retrieval or test anxiety. That's not general ability. Maybe your child's really strong in one subject and inexplicably weak in another that has similar demands. Again, this is a specific skill gap, not a general ability. Or finally, maybe they used to engage with school. They loved it a lot, but progressively they've disengaged over time to the point where they don't even want to go anymore. This is where we've seen now the gap is growing and coping strategies have failed, and now they're completely shutting down. Again, these are all not signs of laziness. They're signs that somewhere along the way, the floor gave way, and your child has been trying to stand in the air ever since. And sometimes kids can mask these gaps for years, especially if they're really bright or they're good at guessing. But eventually the workload that's expected in the middle years just becomes too demanding to compensate. Another major factor to consider is executive functioning skills. And that is the part of the brain that's responsible for things like organization and planning and initiating tasks, staying on focus. That's all kind of a brain management skill. And the reality is that this is the last part of the brain to fully develop. So most middle schoolers in that 10 to 14 range have not developed their executive functioning skills. Some do. Definitely do see that. But the reality is that for a lot of kids, full maturity doesn't take place until their mid-20s. So these are actually things that need to be learned and need to be taught very explicitly. Asking a 12-year-old to independently manage a long-term project, remembering to hand in the homework and switch focus between 6 subjects a day, is actually a lot of brain skill. And that brain is really still under construction. So if you're finding that your child is often forgetting assignments, they're losing materials, their backpack, their desk, their room is a mess, they're procrastinating until the last minute, maybe they say they don't even know where to start. When you see these patterns, they really just need some supports, some simple scaffolding. So that means breaking things down, building systems, reducing that cognitive load, not more pressure. One of the best ways to do that is actually to model it for them, set up those systems in place, because pressure on an overloaded executive functioning system is really like pressing the accelerator on an engine that is already heating. It doesn't help. It's just going to break things. And then finally, your child might just be lacking attention. And I know that society has so many thoughts and ideas on attention deficit, but it is a real thing. And there are kids who definitely are facing that on a daily basis. And maybe you've been noticing that your child can't focus on a task or an activity for more than 10 to 15 minutes. Maybe they fidget a lot. They wiggle in their chair, they're tapping their foot or pen, they can't sit still. Maybe they're really easily distracted by things around them. Maybe you're seeing them be really impulsive. These are all signs that there could be something else, and perhaps some assessments, some further assessments to dig deeper is needed. I want to be very clear about something before I say this next part. I'm not here today to tell you that your child has a learning disability, and I'm not here to scare you. What I am here to do is to give you just enough information to ask some better questions. So with that said, there are absolutely times when a child needs a formal assessment. Not because there's something wrong with them, but because we need more specific information about how their brain works so that we can support them more precisely. So you might consider talking to your child's school or your family doctor about an assessment if the struggle has been consistent and long-term. Not just this past term or this past year, but over the years, despite support and changed approaches, you're still seeing a struggle. Maybe there's a significant gap between what you're seeing at home. Again, maybe your child is capable, curious, intelligent in conversation versus what's happening in school, where they're shutting down and producing nothing. Maybe your child is showing emotional signs alongside of the academic ones, where now we're seeing increased anxiety, refusal to go to school, low self-worth. They're saying things like, I'm stupid, or I just can't do it. Maybe you're seeing patterns across multiple settings. This isn't just happening in school, but it's also happening in sports and hobbies and social situations. This suggests that there might be something more systemic happening here. And finally, strategies that typically help, things like extra time, providing one-on-one support, chunking tasks. They're just making little to no difference. These all could be indications that your child might need an assessment of some kind. But the thing to keep in mind is that assessment is not a label. It's a map. And it's a map that tells you and your child where the terrain is a little tricky so that you can plan a better route together. Those assessments can sometimes identify things like learning disabilities or delays, processing challenges, cognitive delays, ADHD, dyslexia, those types of things. And you can request a referral through your school's learning support team, through your school board or through a family doctor to access the psychological assessment privately or through the public system. And the thing to keep in mind, though, is that wait lists can be very long. So if you're concerned, it's really important to start that conversation sooner rather than later. But it's important to remember, too, that not every struggling learner needs a diagnosis. And getting a diagnosis does not provide a cure. Majority kids all simply just need skill building, they need structured systems and routines, and they need some patient support while they develop academically. Before jumping to conclusions, there's a few simple things that you as a parent can observe at home. Not to diagnose anything, but just to get more information, to be able to see your child more clearly. So the first thing to do is try removing the writing barrier. Writing is probably one of the most cognitively challenging things that we can ask kids to do. And so ask your child to explain their answer out loud instead of writing it down. Ask them about it casually, not necessarily at homework time or schoolwork time, not at the desk, but maybe in the car or at dinner or out on a walk. Ask more open-ended questions like, what did you think about? Or what is that unit about? Don't quiz them, just talk, have conversation. If they engage and they discuss and they're showing understanding and conversation, then you know that the gap is not knowledge. It's in how they're being asked to show what they know. And that's really important information. If they can explain it clearly, verbally, but they struggle to write it down, this might suggest that a writing organization challenge is what they're facing, and it's not a lack of understanding. The second thing you can do is break down tasks into smaller pieces. So again, instead of giving a full assignment, try asking them to just do the first step. So for example, say, let's just read the first paragraph together. If they start working more easily with smaller steps, then the issue may be overwhelm and not motivation. The other thing you could do is set a timer and just do 10-minute chunks of time. Again, this might show that the issue is more with executive functioning than it is with their abilities. And then the third thing to watch for is that confidence language. Really take time to listen for phrases like, I'm bad at this, I'll never get this, I'm just dumb. These statements, and they can be really hard to hear as a parent, they often reveal discouragement, not laziness. Kids who believe that they can succeed usually keep trying. But kids who believe that they can't often stop before they begin. And it's important in these moments to find the things that your kid and your child is really good at, that they do excel and succeed at. Make a list, do it on your own, do that with them. So in the moments where they feel like they're not enough, that their worth becomes attached to what they're doing, you can take them back to who they are as individuals, the character traits that you see in them that are worth celebrating, the skills that they do have that are exceptional. Find those moments so that they know that their worth is not tied into what they're doing with their academics. I want to leave you with this. The parents who are watching a video like this one, who are asking questions, who lie awake at night wondering what their child needs, those parents are not failing. You are not failing. You're paying attention. You're asking questions. And paying attention and asking questions is really the first and most important thing that you can do to help your child. Your child is not lazy. They are just somewhere in the spectrum between struggling with something very specific and having completely shut down because struggling for too long has felt too costly. Both of these things are fixable, and neither of them are your child's character, nor is that a reflection on you as a parent. Most successful learners simply just need more time, they need different strategies, or they need targeted support during the middle years. And with the right support, your child can rebuild skills and confidence. And really, this is one of the reasons why I've created my latest course. It's called the Middle Years Reset, and it's an empowered parent's guide to supporting struggling learners. And inside that course, we walk through how to identify learning gaps. We talk about how to build executive functioning systems that help your child. We talk about how to support struggling readers and writers, because at the core of it, that reading and writing, no matter what the subject, it's essential. And then how to reduce the stress and conflict that often shows up around schoolwork. So if you'd like to learn more, I'll leave the link below. If you found this video useful, save it. Please share it with another parent who's in this same homework battle every single night. And if you're parenting a middle schooler who is navigating these challenges, just know you are not alone. This stage can feel really complicated, and it also can become a turning point with the right support. Keep in mind that your child is still your child. They haven't gone anywhere. And even if it feels like you've got an alien in your home during these middle years, they just need someone who sees them differently than the system does. And you, as that parent, can be that person. I want to invite you to join me again next week when we dive into more tools and strategies to help you support your child through the middle years.